Welcome to a WGBH News special presentation.
Boston is the greatest city on earth.
For over 20 years, Mayor Tom Menino has led the transformation of Boston. Now, Boston elects a new leader, 12 candidates seeking to write the next chapter for the economic and cultural capital of New England. It's an Election 2013 special, a Boston Mayoral Forum.
Good evening, I'm Emily Rooney. Welcome to our viewers on WGBH Channel 2 and our listeners on 89.7 FM WGBH Radio. All this week, we've been hosting the 12 candidates running for mayor of Boston. Each night, I've sat down with 3 candidates selected at random for a 1-hour discussion on the issues facing the city. Issues that affect not just residents, but anyone who comes to town for dinner, to go to school, or take a job. We're now halfway through the 12 candidates, so let me introduce tonight's round. Dan Conley has been the Suffolk County District Attorney since 2002, and before that served 8 years as the District 5 City Councilor. He is a lifelong resident of Boston who now lives in West Roxbury. Charlotte Golar Richie served 3 terms in the state legislature representing Dorchester and then headed Boston's Department of Neighborhood Development for 8 years. She now works in the nonprofit sector and resides in Dorchester. John Connolly is one of 4 at-large city councilors and an attorney in private practice. Before that, he was a middle school teacher who taught in Boston. He is a resident of West Roxbury. Welcome to all of you tonight.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Emily.
So, of course, we're all very familiar with Mayor Menino's style. He's been mayor of Boston for over 20 years. But just to get people a sense of who you are and how you would run the city stylistically, starting with you, John Connolly, what would be your style? How would you, not comparing yourself to Mayor Menino, but describe what your personal touch would be?
I would take pride on recruiting all sorts of talent to Boston and hopefully empowering a generation of leadership in this city that's been sitting on the sidelines and is poised to make a difference. I'm a vision person. I would like to articulate that vision to my cabinet and the people that I bring in, but I'm not a micromanager. I want to let that talent shine. Of course, make sure that they're following through on whatever that vision is and how we're responding to the needs of the residents. But I want to let talent shine, and I want to bring talent to City Hall.
Charlotte?
Well, of course, I have experience working with the mayor, having been his cabinet chief for housing for 8 years and running the Department of Neighborhood Development. So I have seen firsthand the sort of strengths, the challenges of the Menino administration. I envision my administration as focusing heavily on our young people, and I've said that I would establish an Office of Youth Affairs. It would focus on youth employment and leadership and education and advocacy. I would want to work on a plan that would promote full-time or across the year, the full year employment, not just summer jobs. And I also would bring to the table and establish a jobs council. I see myself working very closely with the business community, nonprofit sector. They provide jobs in our community, the small businesses, and really try to improve upon the BRA's estimation that there will be 17,000 jobs that come online in 3 years. I think we could double that number.
Dan Conley.
Well, executive level leadership is something I have a lot of familiarity with, leading the District Attorney's Office now, one of the largest state agencies in government. My style is very deliberative. I also bring in a lot of decision makers when we are faced with some of our toughest decisions. Back in 2002, when I started off, I convened all the executive leaders in the office, all of whom I inherited from a good leader, Ralph Martin. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not the smartest lawyer in the room. I have a lot of experience in this area, but I want to hear opposite points of view. So I encourage debate. I give and take. I think a leader also has to be someone who can recruit the most talented professionals. I've been able to do that in the DA's office. But you got to keep them. You got to maintain, you got to retain them, I should say. And you got to motivate them under a common set of core values and principles. I think I've been able to do that too. That's the kind of leadership I think I can bring to the mayor's office if I'm fortunate enough to be elected.
Today, as you all know, is the 12th anniversary of September 11th, the worst terrorist attacks in this country. It's been 5 months since the marathon bombings of April. Where do you, Dan, Conley, stand on the issue of security cameras. Does there need to be more? Does it have to be every intersection? Should it be all over the city? Should it be focused on neighborhoods where crime is the worst? Where do you stand?
Well, I've been speaking about this since before the marathon, the need to have a more elaborate, publicly owned, closed-circuit TV system. That's one of the big developments, I would say, in the world of crime detection and solving is the use of CCTV. Now, other cities in the world, London, and Lower Manhattan and New York, where I was just a couple of years ago, they have CCTV, closed-circuit television. And it's important that we take advantage of this technology, but we have to do it in a way that balances civil liberties, but also promotes the public safety. And I've been on your show, I've been on NPR to talk about this with the ACLU. And
so would they be privately run, or would the city do it?
Publicly owned. So right now, we have some publicly owned closed circuit, but mostly it's privately owned. And it's difficult sometimes to get it, and the quality is uneven. Boylston Street happened to have high-end quality privately owned video. But I was down there. I know we walked that crime scene right after it happened. We knew that video would help us solve this case. But everybody was gone. Everyone fled the area, and you can understand why. We had to get people back to the retail establishments, to the buildings, download that information, synthesize it through an FBI. If we had our own cameras deployed on Boylston Street that day, I'm not saying this thing could have been stopped, but in New York, for example, they did thwart a terrorist event when someone left a briefcase or a knapsack or something down there on Times Square not long ago. These cameras are smart. They detect this, and they alerted real men and women, police officers who went there and stopped that. So I'm in favor of this. It has to be balanced, though, against civil liberties.
I want you to address the security cameras also, but in addition to that, Charlotte, we have other technologies now that are available to us, drones being one. We're very reliant on police helicopters for buzzing neighborhoods and that kind of thing. Drones have kind of gotten a bad name, but wouldn't they be just as effective and more efficient in a sense?
I don't think so, Emily. I don't think that would be the path, a course of action that I'd be looking to take. I concur with what the DA has talked about in terms of strategically placed cameras, but cameras aren't necessarily a deterrent. People who want to do bad things will ignore the cameras. We see that all the time. I think that we're going to have to step up ways that we alert the community so that they are mindful of what's going on around them and can help to work closely with police. I've talked about strengthening ties with police when we talk about crime in the neighborhoods. The same thing goes around for the situation around terrorism. Furthermore, I think we've got to be smarter and more effective in terms of working across jurisdictions. I would expect to be working hand in glove with the state law enforcement officials as well as the feds to address potential terrorist attack to the city.
I guess I was saying drones in addition to additional security cameras, just as a tool that we have.
I'm not okay with drones. That goes too far, and in my mind, that trips that civil liberties line. I think it's a tough enough balance with the cameras, and I can understand deploying cameras publicly in certain places, but the drones go too far in my mind. To have the eye in the sky, it really, I think, makes the wrong statement. This isn't how we beat the terrorists. We beat the terrorists by living in a free, open society. And I think the drones go too far. You know, there's another piece we never bring up here, which is we could make an investment in bomb-sniffing dogs, Labradors, who can be used in a preventative way as well as a response, but then also deployed to shootings and be used in the collection of evidence and for a number of other uses so that they could be a wise investment 365, 24/7.
There's some frustration in communities of color about crime solving, shootings, murders, that kind of thing. And they look at, people have been, the website Blackstonian, I'll address this to you, Charlotte, has been keeping track of all the shootings and murders in communities of color. They've got over 100, I think it's close to 130 now. And they're saying, why can't you deploy the same amounts of resources? Not obviously it's not going to be Homeland Security, which is what was called in on the bombing suspects, but just more and faster, with a greater sense of urgency. There's a sense that there isn't as much urgency in those communities. Do you agree with that?
You know, I think that's the operative phrase that you're absolutely on point. I think that with on Mayor there will be absolutely a directed, purposeful approach to this issue, and there will absolutely be a sense of urgency in tackling this issue. Remember, I live in the neighborhood that's often been referred to as a hot spot, or labeled as 68 blocks, and I have on occasion found myself having to take a detour because of the yellow tape, because of, walking by the teddy bear memorials and so on. So I have lived through this, and I would say that people in this community, and I think really across the city, have had enough of it. So I would like to be able to revisit community policing, because I think that we can pull the best from what we learned in the 90s and apply it now to what we're seeing in some of our neighborhoods. Crime may be down in general, but we are feeling the effects of what's happening in the neighborhoods, and we have to say that we've been fortunate that the folks who are shooting guns can't shoot straight, and that so I would say yes, and I'm going to community policing, more police on the street, police who are going to walk the beat again. Remember that? This may sound old-fashioned, but that's what residents want. They want to have stronger, closer ties with their police. We want police who are culturally competent, sensitive, who are able to work with communities that are mixed in terms of ethnicity, gender. And I think that we also want to give residents the tools to be able to combat crime and to deal with the fear and the trauma that results from crime.
This goes to the heart of what you do, Dan Conley, your office. How do you respond to that when people say, well, there's kind of a ho-hum attitude towards murder in communities of color, especially if it's gang-related, as opposed to that horrible incident that happened with Amy Lord. There was so much focus and attention on that, and they got the guy right away. But how do you respond to that?
I spent so much of my time working in communities of color. It's a very sad and tragic reality that most victims of crime are citizens of color. And we spend all of our time virtually serving those victims. And I will tell you, as someone who does work in this area, there's the same level of intensity on every case that we bring. Nothing makes us more satisfied than when a jury returns a verdict of guilty in a very serious case, and we can, or homicide, for example, when we can sit with a family and say, we were able to get some measure of justice for your family. Look, the criminal justice system, we come in at the very back end when every other system of government has failed. And we look to police to solve so much of what has occurred after the fact. To me, that's why I want to run for mayor, because I think now the most important thing we can do, if we want to stop the cycle of poverty and violence, independence, is to attack the root causes of this, not the aftermath of violence. Sure, we have to do all we can to solve cases, prosecute them, make sure we win convictions, but how do we stop them? And for me, it's true education reform, it's closing the achievement gap, it's closing the employment opportunity gap, making sure our children, our African American and Latino children, get through high school, hopefully get onto college, if not have a world-class folk tech school that they can go to. That's how you're going to do it, and that's why I'm going to invest in that, as well as early childhood education, to break the cycle of dependency and poverty and violence that I see day to day.
Well, John Connolly, as you know, New York City has taken a very aggressive approach on crime in certain neighborhoods. It's called the stop and frisk policy. Yep. Would you go that far?
No, I don't support stop and frisk. I don't think that's the right way to go, and I don't think it will ultimately solve any of the problems. Look, one of the pieces we're dealing with here, I know the DA works really hard on this and cares, but as a society and as a city, we have devalued young Black and Latino lives in this city. When these shootings happen, they don't get the same response as when a high-profile case happens. And that's the issue here. And there's a breach of trust between the city as a whole and the neighborhoods that are beset by this violence. And so when I look at it, education is the answer and public health is the answer. It's not stop and frisk. This is about how we deal with addiction, mental health, and trauma. I've been in the classroom. I've taught children from every neighborhood in Boston. This is about the 12, 13, 14-year-old who doesn't see a future. Because when he doesn't, he makes one bad decision, which is to drop out, but then he will make worse decisions that will impact his own life and the lives of others. That's what we're trying to combat, and you combat it through great public health policy, and you combat it through world-class public schools. And I got in this race to transform these schools, and that has a net impact of giving us safer neighborhoods and a stronger economy, as well as giving people a great education.
All right, well, if you're just joining us on radio, you're listening to a Boston Mayoral Forum special. I'm Emily Rooney, and I'm joined here by candidates Dan Conley, Charlotte Golar Richie, and John Connolly. We hosted half the candidates earlier this week, and we'll have the remaining 3 tomorrow. How do you respond, Dan, though, to the charge in some circles that the Boston Police Department, and by extension your office, is racist? You know, that you're not involved in these cases because it's a diminished community and people don't care as much.
My goodness, it's just an utter and total distortion. I mean, you know, my office is one of the most diverse public law offices in America, and certainly one of the most diverse offices in Massachusetts, and we care about each and every one of these victims. I've spent time long after these events have occurred, long after the papers have left, long after the politicians have walked away, with these families, these broken families, and we care so deeply about them. And it's just utterly not true that a case involving someone who's not in the communities of color gets more attention than a case that is. This is where we spend, unfortunately, most of our time. Again, we need to get at the root causes here. Why are these shootings occurring? What is causing the breakdown here of empathy and feeling and conflict resolution, that somebody joins a gang, picks up a gun, and actually shoots somebody? Incredible. We need to, I believe, if we're going to break the cycle here of poverty and dependence and ultimately violence, it's going to begin with true education reform, making sure we close the achievement gap and the employment opportunity gap. Bill Clinton once said, the best social program is a job, and I've embraced that for a long time. But if the achievement gap gets too big, kids of color don't graduate from high school, they almost certainly will have a life of poverty and what it leads to, and we want to stop that.
Regardless of whether any of you are going to retain Ed Davis, at some point he's going to leave. You know, he's been in that job for a long time. Over 10 years, I believe. So it's not, either you're going to retain him or he'll move on. So, but the next police chief, Charlotte Golar Richie, what would you be looking for there? I mean, it's now a majority-minority city. Ed Davis had a big name. He came from Lowell. He wasn't really a Bostonian guy. What would you be looking for?
I would be looking for somebody who is going to promote community policing. I mentioned that earlier. I think I will want somebody who is going to understand that there are these root causes that precipitate crime in certain areas, you know, and the DA spoke to that in terms of poverty and lack of access to quality education and employment and all of those things. So I would want to have a superintendent who is going to be mindful of those things, but in some ways that you have a sort of a two-tracks approach, right? One is going to be the long-term goals to eliminate poverty or eliminate homelessness and address those things. That, you know, but that's going to be a way, that's going to take some time to get there. But then there are the immediate actions that can be taken. And one is to have a police force that more closely reflects the population in which it serves. One is to have a force that is going to want to have a more sort of cooperative relationship, I'll say, with the young people who are in the community, who will not be a proponent of stop and frisk and racial profiling and those sorts of methods to fighting crime, but who will have a force that feels that they can work, like I have said, in a cooperative way with community and involve many different partners at the table. We've seen that at the best times with that community policing in terms of that model and what it had to offer. So we want the clergy there. We want our nonprofit organizations and all of the folks who help to sustain and improve our communities there at the table.
Right. Bill Walczak, by the way, is the only candidate among all 12 who has publicly disavowed police detail at construction sites. I mean, we've got it going on out right here. There's, I think, 7 police officers. Their New Balance has a project. They're all staring at the crane or looking into the hole. Tell me why we need police details on construction sites like this here. They weren't helping traffic, by the way. In fact, the opposite.
For starters, I think they make us safer, and we can point to an incident earlier this year where a police officer on a detail actually, I believe, apprehended a suspect coming out from a shooting, if I recall that correctly. Secondly, I think we saw when they went out to bid, the civilian flaggers came in at a higher rate. And that's the one part of the story that is never told. Civilian flaggers actually came in bidding for more than it cost to put a police
no other state
officer
does
out
this,
there.
John. We're the only ones.
The bottom line is we want to be safe from that traffic standpoint. And I do think they
They don't.
make us safer.
They're not really helping
so.
traffic. I mean, if you drive around, you start looking at construction sites. They're
think
generally looking into the hole.
I think that's your
up.
field, but if we look at statistics on actual, incidents around where they're deployed, I think they've actually kept us safe.
Anybody else? Would anybody disavow them?
I wouldn't disavow them, and because on this one I agree with John in part. I see these cases that are solved by cops on detail. However, just today myself, I was trying to get from point A to B, and I was a little frustrated that the officer wasn't actually directing traffic. So I think that's more of a supervision issue. They should be doing their job if we're going to have them out there. There is the corollary benefit to having them on the street. And their presence alone, exudes authority, I guess, and that's a relatively good thing. And if it's a back road or something like that, maybe we can consider other alternatives.
Well, I would say in certain locations. And if we are looking at the areas that we are targeting to bring, sort of address crime and gun violence and things like that, and we've got a utility company that is going to need somebody there at a construction site, maybe they're going, sort of drilling or doing whatever in the evening hours or whatever it is, it's not bad to have a police officer there, especially if we're trying to, again, push to have police officers working more cooperatively with the public. And so I am in favor of that.
All right, I want to move on to fire department. This is another issue kind of burning in my soul. As you know, Stephen Abrera was brought in in 2011, John Conley, to really reform the department. But he got run out of town after the Boston marathons. With rank and file rose up and basically said he didn't do his job on marathon bombing day. None of us really knows what happened, but he couldn't take the heat. He pulled himself out of the position because the criticism was so intense. The question is the union just so intimidating, so big in there that no one dares stand up to them?
I think there were some legitimate questions about Chief Abrera's professionalism on the job and whether he was performing the job well, but I also think that the way his captains and those lower than him that he was supervising handled it publicly, that left a bad taste and wasn't the right way to do it. We certainly, I think, have a structural issue there when you have everyone except for the commissioner, I believe, and 3 civilians functionally in the union. You look at how our police department is set up. We've got the commissioner, we've got a command staff, and then we have superior officers, detectives, and patrolmen, and 1 additional union, I believe, as well. And that's probably a better way to be set up. It's certainly an issue. But what we've got to do here, we need to have, for every city department, including the fire department, whoever the next mayor is, has got to do a top-to-bottom, audit and programming assessment and look at all the structural pieces and then begin to reshape city departments that are in need of changes, including inspectional and services.
The sense is, from rank and file in Boston, that the union runs the fire department. I mean, right now, the statistics are shocking. Fewer than 10% of the calls that the fire department goes out on are for fires.
And I would be in favor of an independent assessment on all of those issues to bring someone in from the outside to neutrally assess exactly what is needed to make sure that we're doing the right thing as the fire department.
Would you consider closing? There's 34 stations. Would you close? Would you consolidate?
I would want to see what an independent analysis says relative to all the pieces and how the fire department functions.
Those independent analyses have occurred in the fire department, and unfortunately what's happened is they gather dust in some office in City Hall. Well, because
people are afraid of the unions.
The union is very powerful and resistant to change.
Yeah, the union. I'm sorry, I didn't.
And that's it's been a strong and difficult union to deal with for decades. But there is all departments of the city government can get better, including the fire department. This job's not going to be for the faint of heart. I have some experience in reforming systems. When I became district attorney, the way the police investigated homicide cases was very different from the way they do it today, and they were resistant to that change. But at some point, some leader has to show the courage and the character and the backbone to stand up to powerful interests and make them change for the greater good. So the way we do this now is referred to by some folks, Barry Scheck, I believe, is one of the best ways of investigating serious crime and homicide in the country. Once called the gold standard by this PhD, Gary Wells, who studies memory and how We investigate eyewitness identification cases. That was the right thing to do. I'm not looking to get into a fight with the fire department. A lot of my friends, men that I've known, I don't know if I know any women that are on the job, there aren't many, I grew up with. But look, you have to have a leader who's going to say, you know, after the review is done, these are the reforms, and they're going to get done.
Yeah, because as you know, Charlotte, they go out on every call. I mean, a lot of them aren't trained EMTs, should be. I was saying last night that there's no way to do a reverse 911. For instance, I'm burning my chicken livers, which it has happened to me more than like 5 or 6 times. You know, the smoke thing goes off. There's no way for me as a resident to dial back and say false alarm.
Right. So I support an outside review, and it's true that you don't want to have sort of these reviews gathering dust on a shelf somewhere, and so maybe we need to pull them off a shelf. But I think at the crux of the matter, at least with the fire department, is that you do have managers who are in the union managing the rank and file. And I think that's something that I would want to try to tackle and I'd work with the union to do that. I mean, it's going to be hard to make a lot of change when you have in a union environment. It's hard to make change if you're not going to be able to work with folks there. You may think you can go in there with a club, but it's not going to work. I have shown that I can work in a union environment, as difficult or challenging as it may be. But and so maybe that will stand me in good stead when I'm mayor.
All right. We're going to move on to education, which I know is a big issue for all of you. John Conley, you have said that you are in favor of decentralizing the school system. What does that mean? And would that make it more efficient or less efficient? Because it seems like a centralized system, because it's so vast. Your colleague Bill Walczak called it the biggest bureaucracy you'd ever stumbled into. But how would you make it less so by decentralizing? Explain what that means.
Well, you do it so every child in Boston can get a high-quality education. And too often in education we forget that's the goal. That's what we're trying to do. We've got to remember this is about our children, giving them all a high-quality education. So it means that you take this top-heavy bureaucracy that oversees $1 billion budget annually, but can't find a way to make sure every child gets arts and music or extended learning time. A school bureaucracy where they had no inventory control on school food to the tune that they were. I know how you feel about that, but to the tune where they're spending tens of thousands of dollars a month to store this food for years on end. Just wasting money because of poor management. You put the power at the school level and you build schools from the bottom up. So the one thing it requires is that you train excellent principals. And that's where Boston ought to be leaning on Harvard and Wheelock and Boston Teacher Residency and nonprofit partners to help train our principals. You put a great principal in a school, and then a principal working with teachers and parents builds that school from the bottom up, knowing the students that go in there every day. And that's how you make a school work. That when you look at the schools that are great in Boston, it's not because of that bureaucracy helping it. In fact, the bureaucracy gets in the way. It's because that school has a great principal, and great teachers follow great principals, and great teachers and great principals get parents involved in schools. And that's really what it's all about.
One of the biggest issues is the whole school assignment system. One of your fellow candidates, John Barrows, thinks there just ought to be a simple one application for every school. It doesn't matter where you want to go, a charter school, a public school. Everybody files the same kind of application. Would you get on board with that?
Well, I mean, he was on the committee. I don't know why the committee did not look at that. I'm not opposed to it. I think there's a plan that's already in motion. So in some ways, the horse has left the barn, and so to speak. Should I be elected, or any one of us, we are going to have to make a decision about whether to move ahead with the plan that was proposed and voted by the committee, or whether to derail the whole thing when you have families who will be looking for an assignment. So that's the decision the next mayor has.
Dan, no one's faulting you for putting your kids in private school. I don't think anybody's critical of that. That's a very personal decision, and you've made it clear why you've done that. But is it awkward at all when you're talking about schools and you're looking at your colleagues here and saying, well, I'm not a part of the Boston public school system? Is it just awkward as a candidate?
No, as I said in other times the question's been asked, it's a very personal decision. My wife and I agonized over it, but we made a decision we thought was right for our family. I think that's what parents do all over Boston. I have 6 brothers and sisters. Most of them live in Boston, and they're actually spread out over traditional schools, traditional Boston public schools, and charter schools, as well as parochial and private schools. So, I know I was the product, of a Catholic school education. My father was a telephone technician, saved money to get us all through. I know John as well, went to private schools in his life. I'm not sure about Charlotte, but these are decisions that parents make, and they try to do what's best for their kids. Doesn't mean I don't care deeply about the children of Boston. I certainly do, and I am convinced that education reform is the greatest. We have the greatest opportunity here to be transformative, whoever becomes mayor, by once and for all having true education reform, closing the achievement gap for African American and Latino kids, to give them opportunity and hope to compete in the knowledge economy of the 21st century.
We focus so much on this cap on the charter schools. I mean, forget whether there's all charter schools or, we keep the same number or we increase it by triple-fold. What about the fact that they still don't have to play by all the same rules as the Boston Public Schools? I mean, their special ed system is not the same. They can basically reject somebody based on that. And they say it's a lottery. Yeah, wink, wink, it's a lottery. They're still peeling off the cream of the crop.
Look, there's long lines to get into our charter schools, and I think that tells us something right off the bat. People want to use these schools because they are closing the achievement gap. The outcomes are better. And the autonomy and the decision-making is made at the school level, and that's what makes them so attractive. That's the kind of thing that needs to be pushed out to the traditional schools and the innovation schools and the pilot schools and all the rest. If I'm elected mayor, I am presently in favor of lifting the cap on charter schools. Will advocate for lifting the cap on charter schools because I think parents should have more choices, not less. But at the same time, the charter school movement needs to be challenged to make sure that they're not counseling out kids with special needs, that they're taking on difficult students. When I say difficult in the sense of, whether it be special needs, whether it be behavioral issues, whether it be issues around English language learning. Don't take all the easy ones, and we know it's a lottery system, but I would be challenging the charter school movement to get involved with that. But we can't be all charter. I'm not advocating for that, of course, but what I am advocating for is the model, the autonomy at the school level, where creativity, innovation, change will occur.
Go ahead.
I think you can advocate for the model in the public schools. The next mayor has to be the champion of those 57,000 students in the 127 Boston public schools in our system, because the majority of our students are there. That's where they will be educated. Those are the schools they'll graduate from. And you can lift the cap today, and you're still not going to be able to provide that option for all of those schools. The option that most of our children have will be in the Boston public schools. Now, I'm not arguing or being an opponent to charter schools. I'm being a proponent for public education in this city, and that's where I will put my energy. I have said, I didn't slam the door shut on charter schools precisely because if someone came to me with a proposal to bring a charter school to Boston that was focused on disconnected youth, for example, young people who've dropped out of school, or young people exiting foster care, or a proposal to deal with the lowest performing schools in the system, I'd have to look at that, Emily. But I think to say that we're going to open up the cap, you're going to get folks who want to establish schools, looking for city resources, city land, reaching out to foundations that are supporting programs that combat poverty or trying to get the business community involved when we need them around jobs and economic development and crime. It just does not make a lot of sense to me.
Just quickly, would anybody here want to return to a elected school system, John Conley, elected school board, excuse me, would you?
No, I want to keep it appointed. I also want to get us out of this toxic debate and get the charters and BPS on the same page. We should work together and stop demonizing one set of schools and creating this toxic debate.
And you've said kind of you would do half and half, Charlotte.
No, I said I was a state rep in 1994 or 95 when the proposal was introduced, and I supported the appointed school committee when it was not a popular thing to do. As mayor, I will look forward to appointing new members to the appointed school committee, and that's my first choice. What I said, and what was misconstrued, I believe, by a reporter, was that by saying that I would look at what a hybrid model would look like, that meant that I was automatically adopting that model, but I'm not. To put my energy into trying to get a referendum passed and all of that, that's not what we should be investing time in. We want to invest in trying to improve our schools, quality schools, and changing the life prospects of our young people in terms of having them career ready and college ready when they leave our system.
Dan?
I'm in favor of an appointed school committee, and when I was a very relatively new city councilor, campaigned for that to become a permanent situation. We have to take politics. It's not about adults, it's about children, and the appointed school committee is the best way to get the policies that we need to educate our children.
All right, well, if you're just joining us on radio, you're listening to a Boston Mayoral Forum special. I'm Emily Rooney, and I'm joined here by candidates Dan Conley, Charlotte Golar Richie, and John Connolly. We hosted half the candidates earlier this week, and we will have the remaining 3 tomorrow. Now, onto our nuisance round. This is a list that I came up with being a neighborhood resident myself, and I have, being a Boston resident, I should say, and I've solicited some questions and ideas from other people who live around the city. So, starting with number 1, this is just undeniable. Boston is dirty. People drop their coffee cups, they drop their cigarette butts, they drop their litter, the garbage cans get filled, and then the big wind comes along and blows all the garbage out of it, and it's certainly not Public Works' job to pick that stuff up. I just found out this morning from the Neighborhood Association of the Back Bay, I was actually stunned to learn this, they hired their own cleaners and paid for it for the entire summer. They even peeled things off posts, stickers and all that kind of stuff. I'll start with you, Dan Connolly, how do we get people into the mentality, not just the store owners and everybody, about littering the city?
Well, whenever I see a dirty street, it drives me mad, and it makes me even crazier when I see someone throw a coffee cup or something out of their automobile. I mean, I remember, I'm old enough to remember, maybe some of you are, I don't know about you, John, but that commercial with the Indian car.
Yeah, the Indian, of course.
And it changed people's values and attitudes with respect. Wait a second, we need something like that, especially with our young people, and we have to be able to correct them. I know it's somewhat delicate, but we can't have people just dropping their litter and thinking that that's perfectly okay. We have to make sure that we have a robust education campaign. Stop doing this.
All right, how about the garbage cutters? They go through the alleys Mondays and Thursdays in Back Bay, other days of the week in the South End, Beacon Hill, come in, cut the garbage open. Would you find those people? Would you stop them? What would you do?
I don't think they're. You know why they're cutting garbage?
Yeah, they're
right?
looking for.
They're looking for the cans and the bottles,
but the cans are mostly in plastic bags now.
I know.
They don't care.
Right. So
now
one
they're
thing,
looking for
what I would
there.
like to do is to beef up our recycling program. The recycling contract is up in 2014, so this is a chance to do this. I would like to see receptacles out there, greater number. I know we have those blue bins and things like that. It doesn't always work for all areas and stuff, but I would like to see them out in terms of in front of businesses as well. We have them in front of residences. I'd like them in front of businesses. I'd like people to be able to, if whoever's looking for cans and bottles will know exactly where to go as opposed to slicing the trash to do this. I think that in terms of trash overall, we got to start in our schools. This is one of these things that we have to do. I mean, kids go to the variety store, they pick up their potato chips or whatever, the candy bars, and the wrappers are all over the street, right? So we have to start with our young kids and let them know you cannot litter, and then it's a culture change, but it can happen.
All right, continuing with our nuisance around here, John Connolly, what would you do about panhandlers?
So I don't get trash.
You can do trash, but I'm trying to get whipped through these. Everybody wants the city to be clean.
I don't get to talk charter schools. I don't get trash. Okay, on panhandlers, the way you solve this is to end homelessness, and it's not an easy job, but we have some great infrastructure across this city. But we need to do more, and it's housing first models. It's where you go. There are some pieces Mayor can do to have a role on this. We've got to change some zoning pieces to get more housing first models under construction and in place out in this city. And that's about the notion that when you have a homeless person, what you're going to try to do is get them into shelter, an actual house first. It's not about the shelter model where you're going to move in and out, but getting them into actual long-term living circumstances with the support services around it to help that person, maintain stability and to hopefully work to a much better point in their life, recognizing a lot of mental illness that you're dealing with and a lot of issues around addiction. But that's the only way you're going to solve this. I don't think that we want to be taking such harsh draconian measures that some people would suggest. Obviously, we want to have a response when there's incidents happening relative to this. But you got to end homelessness if you really want to solve this.
We're about to get these medical marijuana dispensaries. If a neighborhood, Dan Conley, finds them to be a nuisance, they're attracting people they don't want, should the city have the right to be able to just shut those down?
Well, the city should have a right to be able to make sure that all of us live in peace and enjoyment of our neighborhoods. I was not in favor of this this referendum question. I think it's a terrible path that we're on. I think, unfortunately, people that are in their 50s and 60s and 70s, they say, geez, we smoke marijuana in college, and everybody's fine. I will tell you, as a law enforcement professional, this marijuana that's out there on the street today, and I'm going to talk about the medical marijuana, very, very highly potent, and I would argue addictive. And it dumbs down people, and it makes them lazy, of course, and it keeps them out of the workforce and so forth. So many problems. And what we worry about with medical marijuana is that there'll be unscrupulous physicians who will say that, this particular condition requires this particular treatment. Most, I think, reputable physicians won't go down that road. But
so yes, the city should be able to shut them down.
Yes, sorry, right. Long waves.
Motorcycle noise, Charlotte, Golar, Richie. This is something that drives people crazy, that people come in from the bridges and tunnels. They've got these aftermarket pipes. There is a noise abatement. There's a law in place. No one enforces it.
Well, I was just with some members of a motorcycle club at a cookout, and we had a great time. I guess I should have talked to them about the noise. Noise, trash, all of these things have to be looked at and wrestled with, Emily. I think I would want to enforce all of our laws and ordinances and policies around noise. It does affect people's quality of life. I remember being a young mom with a baby that you would just sort of say a prayer when the baby finally went to sleep, and then a motorcycle comes whizzing through and through your neighborhood, and it's like the baby wakes up, and I talk to seniors. The noise it can make you nuts. So I think that has to be something that I'm going to really chase down with a vengeance. I would expect to do that and enforce the law.
Charity walks, parades, public gatherings, they're mostly in the same place. They're mostly in Conley Square. Residents, for the most part, get no notice. There's no notices in the Prue Tunnel that you can't turn left, and then by the time you get into Conley Square, you're circling for 40 minutes just to get out. Would you change where some of these events are held?
So I think on all of these issues, there's one element that we have to do, whoever the next mayor is. We've got to transform the way we deliver city services. We don't function in a user-friendly, customer-friendly way right now. There's plenty of great city workers, but on the whole, we don't. And we want to make you feel like you're walking into the Apple store when you go into City Hall and you're trying to access a city service. I want somebody flying at you with an iPad, and the only thing they're going to ask you is, how can I help you? I want you to access everything online. I think that's what makes the difference. On these parades and celebrations, you know what? The city ought to do better on informing residents what's going on. We ought to use technology in a better way to inform residents what's going on. But I think one of the great things about this city is when we celebrate anything, pretty much. I think maybe with a couple of exceptions, but those are great things. The Pride Parade. The Pride Parade is one of the best things we do in this city. And I wouldn't change the where part. What I want to change is that we have an arts and cultural agenda in this city that allows a vibrant arts and social life to flow throughout this entire city. And maybe if we do that, you'd find that we might spread out a little more. But I think it's on us to inform residents way ahead of time, and you ought to be able to just go on a city website and find these things in an easy fashion. But I don't want to put I don't want to curtail our celebration of all our various communities out there.
All right. This is a non-nuisance question. I'll put this to you. You didn't get charter schools, but you're going to get innovation. We pride ourselves on being an innovation hub. Massachusetts, Kendall Square, of course. Boston would like to be competitive with that, but we've birthed some operations here, Facebook included. Yeah. What would you do, John Connolly, to bring like a marquee outfit like that into town, get them to grow here, develop here, and make Boston a Silicon Valley, or even competitive with Cambridge, which we are not yet?
Well, I don't think we want to compete with Cambridge, and I think we make a mistake when we act like we are competing with Cambridge. We're a regional economy, and our jobs in the innovation economy are driven by this region. So the next mayor has to get Cambridge, Waltham, Watertown, Somerville in the room, and we need a joint regional plan for job creation, and we need to talk about how are we going to make sure we're the anchor for clean technology, how are we going to make sure we're the home for big data, how are we going to make sure we dominate education technology from a global perspective. So that's about a joint plan. I think the piece on Facebook is it's not so much about recruiting a company here, and I'll take every company we can recruit here. Facebook was born here. It went somewhere else to grow up. Dropbox and Reddit, the same way. So right now there's another Facebook, another Dropbox that's somewhere in the Boston-Cambridge area, And it's about nurturing that business so it grows here and stays here. That's about taking the innovation zone citywide and region-wide. And it's also about a housing policy so that young professionals young techies can afford to stay here and we retain our talent.
That's what I was going to go into next. Let me just remind people joining us on radio that you're listening to a Boston Mayoral Forum. I'm Emily Rooney. I'm joined here by candidates Dan Conley, Charlotte, Golar, Richie, and John Connolly, and we'll have other 3 candidates tomorrow night. So that was where I was going with this next. I'll start with you, Dan Connolly. I mean, a lot of people tell me, young people I work with in the newsroom right here, they live in Kendall Square, they live in Kenmore Square with 2 roommates, and they want to live in the city, love to have their own place, but people in a certain income group, they can't do it. And they feel like the city has really been maxed out, that only people in middle and upper incomes can afford to live here.
It's a really big and pressing issue, and I intend to take it head on. I mean, Menino has established that he wants to have 30,000 housing units.
Would you support that?
Yes, and I think we might even have to expand upon that because, like the people you talk to, I talk to the same young professionals as well. They're adding so much life and vibrancy, to our city, and of course the economics. And so many of them don't live in the city, and they're living in apartments outside of Boston. They want to live here. We have to develop and grow moderate workforce housing in our city. We've got to push it out of the urban core, downtown. Forget about it. They can't afford those $3,000, $4,000 a month rents. But maybe they could afford something out in Dorchester or Hyde Park or West Roxbury, East Boston, or any one of the great neighborhoods. They have to be built around transportation hubs. A lot of these young professionals especially don't want to own an automobile, and they shouldn't have to. The T needs to get better, run more efficiently, and run longer hours. All of that is critically important. We have to be open to the idea of micro-housing, and I am, and I think that's very important for our young professionals. I was over at the Cambridge Innovation Center and took a nice tour over there about a month or 6 weeks ago, and we were talking about housing over there. And the young professionals that work there, their breaking point is around $1,000 a month. So they'll be willing to spend. Their average right now is $750 that they're paying. They'll be willing to spend about $1,000. Well, there's nothing downtown Boston that you can get for $1,000 that I'm aware of. So that housing has to be pushed out to the neighborhoods of Boston. And we can't forget that after these young professionals grow up, meet someone special, and want to get married, start a family, we need to build middle-class housing for families, and that's what I intend to do if I'm fortunate enough to be elected mayor.
Charlotte, the group Boston Future, I think Greg Selko's group, has said that Mayor Menino has taken all the fun out of the city. It's not a 24-hour operation. There's no social life. There's no nightlife. Would you push for that? Would you? And by the way, on that point, would you allow more liquor licenses? And when you take away these onerous fees, $650,000, I don't understand why anybody would discourage somebody from opening a bar or restaurant and levy those kind of fees on them with fines.
The system is kind of mysterious, isn't it? In terms of making this a city that has more fun, if you go down to the Seaport District, things have changed down there, haven't they? And I think that we can use that as a place to kind of pilot a few things. I think working with restaurants, I'd see that I would support them being open later. I would love to work with the MBTA to see that our transportation system operates longer hours. Of course, that will take funding to do it, or at least reallocation of service, and so creative approaches to that. But I absolutely think that I'd like to, in certain sections of the city, see that we are more of an 18-hour city. It might not be in our dense neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods, but we could certainly do it in the downtown, and we could do it, maybe in Copley Square area, and certainly in the Seaport District.
What about the T, though, John Connolly? That would mean running the T later, or who pays for that? And you've got public safety concerns.
The T is vital to this. We may actually be safer if we're a city that's open longer because we won't disperse everybody onto the streets at 2 p.m., 2 a.m., 2 p.m., at 2 a.m. That actually creates, in my mind, public safety issues. But if we've got staggered closing times, and you can look at cities like New York, you have far fewer incidents. But the T's key to this. It doesn't work if we don't have the T. One of the big problems we have is we dump everybody out onto the streets and they can only get home by cab, and we know that we've got to reform that industry. So how do we do it? I'd put priority one, extending hours. We've got to look to corporate sponsorship. New Balance presents a great example of partnerships here. They're building a commuter rail station that's going to enhance the quality of life in Brighton and Alston, right next to WGBH. It's a great example. We could go lean on corporate partners and institutional partners to help us expand T hours. The dollars will be returned, many times over because of that investment and ability to keep talent in the city.
All right, we have just a few minutes left, and I want to use that to go hit a couple of miscellaneous things. Would you, starting with you, John Conley, would you open that South Boston bypass road to general traffic? It's been used by commercial vehicles ever since the Big Dig, but I longingly look at that every time I go through South Boston and think I could just cut right over here. What do you think?
I think we've got to listen to the South Boston community on that. If there's one community that has been beset by overdevelopment, it's South Boston. I think we want to look at whether that ought to be open for residents only in that area, where they have just crazy problems relative to parking and overdevelopment. We ought to open the access road in East Boston, which is very similar to the East Boston community as well.
Would you open it, Cheryl?
I actually agree with what John is saying. I would want to go through a community process to allow for residents to weigh in on that. But I agree with East Boston, because we have heard that they'd like to have that open to resident traffic. So I'd be for that.
Should I do a traffic study first?
Yeah,
if it would negatively
right.
affect South Boston, I would open it, and it's maybe you open it at rush hour or something like that.
What do you say on these little parklets that are going up in some communities? I'll start with Dan Conley. I mean, is it kind of condescending? It's like, oh, well, these people don't have any greenery, so we're taking away 2 parking spots, putting in these little parks with a couple of benches out on the curb. Do we need this?
Well, green space is really important, and in neighborhoods that don't have it, maybe we have to consider it.
So somebody's going to go sit on a curb? And
I don't think to me it's not the greatest thing, but I've also seen vacant lots converted into nice parks. I think of one in Jamaica Plain where my wife lived near.
Yeah, we're not talking about that. We're talking about these little parklets. All right, I'm going to move on. Do you support gender-neutral bathrooms for parks?
For parks.
Yeah.
This is where I'm old-fashioned. I have to say that I like to go to women's room.
I'm with you. Don't get me going. Yeah, I'm with you on there. I'll come back to you, John, in a second. But just in the last couple of weeks, Dan Conley, a couple of nightclubs have been forced to shut down because of this drug, Molly. Is that the way to go, forcing a nightclub to close? Or I know some of them have done it on their own volition, but is that the solution for this drug?
Well, licensed premises is a privilege, and we have to do a better job of holding the venue accountable. I mean, I feel for them. I know that small drug like Molly can be snuck in very easily. So perhaps a fine system might be something worth considering. But it's a privilege to run a licensed premises, and that's where enforcement will have to be.
The city has made a big effort, John Connolly, to become much more bike-friendly. But have we gone out of our minds? We're closing one lane of the Longfellow Bridge right out here on Market Street. They've closed down one lane. I spoke this morning with someone from the Back Bay Association who said that they plead every year with the bike czar, Nicole Friedman, not to put a bike lane on Boylston Street. Is there just some streets, Huntington Avenue, for instance, that it just doesn't work?
What we need to do is follow the Boston Bike Plan and look at that very closely and try to implement that. But we need to make this city more bike-friendly. And I think that in the long run, that's going to be better for motorists, pedestrians, and cyclists. So I want to see the construction of cycle tracks across this city. And if we pick the pathways the right way, then you'd find some roads wouldn't have lanes and others would. But what we would know is our cyclists were safe and we could encourage more cycling. But the bottom line here is whether it's cycling or the T, we want to create a transportation infrastructure so that people don't feel like they have to use their cars. We want to get people out of their cars. We want to have effective bus rapid transit. We want to have real bike infrastructure. And we want to be a walking city with a complete streets approach to these issues. So I think we've got to invest more in bike infrastructure.
Are there any streets that are off limits?
I think there would be some, yeah. but we've got to. But that also provides that we get real bike infrastructure in place so that cyclists are treated as they should be, as equal travelers in our city, right along with those who walk and those who drive.
Anybody ever ridden a Hubway? Have you, Dan Conley?
I have not, no.
Charlotte?
I have not.
I have.
Yeah, how was it?
I love it. It's great, and I don't use it all the time, but I've used it 3 or 4 times. And at one point, I got a flat tire. I was at St. Francis House, right off the Common, our only day shelter in the city. My car got a flat tire. I had an appointment in the Fenway. I got on the Hubway. I biked there. It was great.
All right,
Went
final
right down
question
Conley.
here. Would you, Dan Connolly, support a 2024 bid for the Summer Olympics right here in the city of Boston?
Sure, why not? It's going to be a lot of hard work, but it'd be great to have it here.
Charlotte?
It'd be really, really exciting, wouldn't it? I think I'd look at it seriously.
Yep, we're a global city. Let's also bring the gay games here as well.
Seriously?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, send a real message about our.
We're talking about
city inclusion.
billions of dollars investment. The Winter Olympics might be easier.
It would be. It'd be great. I'd love hockey.
We could have get New Hampshire and Vermont involved, but
Absolutely.
so you don't think it's an unrealistic?
Well, we'd certainly have to work with our business community because none of these events are capable of being held unless the business community, is vibrantly behind it. I know the convention is not on par with the Olympics, but lots of folks thought in 2004 we shouldn't have the convention here. It was too costly, but the business community came together and said, let's have it here. Let's make Boston. We know it's a global city. Let's show it off.
All right. Thank you all for joining me here tonight. That concludes our 3rd Boston Mayoral Forum. I want to thank the 3 candidates joining me tonight: Dan Conley, Charlotte Golar, Richie, and John Connolly. As I said at the start, even if you don't live in Boston, the city plays a vital role in our region's economy. The next mayor will have influence well beyond the city limits, so please come back tomorrow night for our final forum. I'll be joined here tomorrow by Felix Arroyo, Marty Walsh, and John Barros. We hosted the other candidates earlier this week. Those forums are available on our website, along with all of our mayoral election coverage. That's at wgbhnews.org. And just a reminder to all Boston residents, the preliminary election is September 24th. Thanks for watching on WGBH Channel 2 and listening on 89.7 FM WGBH Radio. I'm Emily Rooney. We'll see you tomorrow night. Thank you so much.